Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Noon Book Club. Very nice to see you all this evening. Can see kind of various people kind of coming in. Don't worry, I'll just kind of chat for a bit while everybody gets settled. So we're really delighted today to have a very special guest joining us, Clare Pooley, whose book I think deals with lots of very wonderfully relevant ideas for our Noon community. And in a minute, she's going to read a bit from her lovely book, which I know some of you have got, which is called The Authenticity Project. Of course, this is all backwards, so you can't actually read what it says. Yes. Oh, you're very clever. How come yours doesn't go backwards like mine does?
Yours is forward on my screen and mine is backwards. So.
Okay, so if you both do it, you'll get one. Maybe you get them both.
You can see it around the right way.
We'll have to get Jen to tell us whether that's correct or not. But I really like this book. There was so many things in it which really kind of really connected with me, and which I thought would make really good jumping points for our conversation today. And just to tell you a little bit about Clare, this is her first novel, so congratulations for getting it over the line. I know you've just had another one published as well. And Clare worked in advertising for a long time, and then stopped and gave it all up, and was at home with her kids for quite a long time. And then she wrote a very well-known and well-trodden blog about called "Mummy Was a Secret Drinker," and then out of that came her book, The Sober Diaries, which was published in 2017 to great fanfare. And her TED talk, Making Sober, had 100. Making Sober Less Shameful had over 190,000 views. So we'll talk a bit about that as well. But this book, the debut book, The Authenticity Project, very much seemed to come out of a lot of those experiences, which we'll cover a bit later. But why don't we hear a bit from the Authenticity Project? Sorry, I'm down in Cornwall. It's been raining a lot of the day, but the sun is now streaming through the window where I am. So if I look a bit stripy, I'm sorry about that. But Clare, take it away.
Thank you. So I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book, because it sort of really introduces the whole concept of the Authenticity Project. So here we go. So the first chapter is titled Monica. She had tried to return the book. As soon as she realized it had been left behind, she'd picked it up and rushed after its extraordinary owner, but he'd gone. He moved surprisingly swiftly for someone so old. Maybe he really didn't want to be found. It was a plain, pale green exercise book, like the one Monica had carried around with her at school, filled with details of homework assignments. Her friends had covered their books with graffiti of hearts, flowers, and the names of their latest crushes, but Monica was not a doodler. She had too much respect for good stationery. On the front cover were 3 words beautifully etched in copperplate script: The Authenticity Project. In smaller writing, in the bottom corner, was a date, October 2018. Perhaps, thought Monica, there would be an address or at least a name on the inside so she could return it. Although it was physically unassuming, it had an air of significance about it. She turned over the front cover. There were only a few paragraphs on the first page. How well do you know the people who live near you? How well do they know you? Do you even know the names of your neighbours? Would you realise if they were in trouble or hadn't left their house for days? Everyone lies about their lives. What would happen if you shared the truth instead? The one thing that defines you, that makes everything else about you fall into place. Not on the internet, but with those real people around you. Perhaps nothing. Or maybe telling that story would change your life, or the life of someone you've not yet met. That's what I want to find out. There was more on the next page, and Monica was dying to read on, but it was one of the busiest times of day in the cafe, and she knew it was crucial not to fall behind schedule. That way madness lay. She tucked the book into the space alongside the till with the spare menus and flyers from various suppliers. She'd read it later when she could concentrate properly. So that's the beginning. Monica finds a book titled The Authenticity Project, and everything comes from there.
So Claire touched in the introduction a bit about how you became interested in this kind of notion of authenticity, and how that came about within your own life. Should we maybe kind of start there, because It's a kind of interesting premise for a book, isn't it? That
Sure.
you would strip yourself down.
Yeah, I mean, the story really starts 7 years ago when I realized that my life was sort of spinning rather out of control. Because, if you looked at my Instagram or my Facebook, or, if you saw me at the school gate, my life looked like it was completely in control, and it all looked sorted and fine and happy. And the truth was very different, because I actually had a sort of chronic alcohol addiction, and which I was trying very hard to keep in control, and I was trying very hard not to let anyone know what was going on. But I eventually came to the decision that I had to quit drinking, which I didn't want to do, but I knew I had no choice. So that was 7 years ago. I stopped drinking, and I was too ashamed to talk to AA or to anyone I knew, to my family, my friends, anyone. So my therapy really was to writing a blog, and I set up this blog called Mummy Was a Secret Drinker, and I wrote anonymously under a pseudonym, Sober Mummy, and I sort of told the whole real unvarnished truth about my life to this blog. And doing that completely changed my life. It helped me quit drinking. It helped me understand what I was going through, why I was in the mess I was in. And it helped thousands and thousands of people who then found my blog and were in the same boat that I was in, and people who then went on and read the Sober Diaries. So, so I started thinking, well, if telling the real truth, the authentic truth about your life can make magical things happen for you and the people around you, what might happen if other people were to do the same? And that's really where the idea for the Authenticity Project came from.
It's a very brave thing to do, to start writing a kind of a secret blog kind of online. And was it really the blog that helped you give up the drinking? Was it kind of part of the process?
Oh, hang on, sorry, somebody is calling me, so I've just lost you.
Sorry, should I say that again?
No, don't worry. Yes.
So when you started writing the blog, had you already stopped drinking, or were you thinking that you needed to?
No, I stopped drinking the day I started writing the blog. And the blog, yes, as it was what helped me. It was my therapy. And they say that the opposite of addiction is connection, and that's really what I found, is that sort of, it's really difficult to deal with an addiction by yourself, and having sort of, creating a community around you is really important, and that's what the blog did for me. But it's interesting, you said it was brave, but I didn't feel brave at all, because I was hiding under this pseudonym. It was actually I felt immense shame. I was really far too scared and ashamed to sort of come out in real life. And it wasn't till about a year later when I got a publishing deal and decided to sort of announce who I really was. That was the really frightening bit, really.
But I suppose by that point you knew that it was really connecting with people, and it was really, already doing some good.
Yes, yeah, and actually, so many people who were reading the blog started saying, please, can you publish this as a book, because it would help so many people, and that's that's really what gave me the courage to do it. It was the encouragement of the people who've been reading the blog.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, isn't it? So there was a kind of urge to authenticity, kind of, but a private kind of authenticity, which was then kind of outed a bit further down the line. Yes,
exactly. So it was sort of one step at a time, really. And actually, it's funny, because about 3 nights before the Sober Diaries came out, and it was, I knew it was about to be publicised in the Daily Mail, and it was I was going to be on Woman's Hour and Steve Wright and Lorraine and all this, telling the most sort of awful secrets about my life. And I was utterly terrified. And it felt like I had this dream for 3 nights in a row. And I don't know if you've ever had this dream, Eleanor, where, you dream that you're walking down a street, perfectly normal, busy street, and you're completely naked and everybody else has got their clothes on. And I had that dream 3 nights in a row. And I think that was my subconscious saying, oh my God, you're about to expose yourself in front of these sort of, thousands and thousands, no, millions of people.
Millions.
And what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sensible kind of unconscious. But what I know from having been a columnist for a long time on a newspaper, and also having encouraged a lot of people over the years to write in a very kind of honest way about their experiences as an editor, is that there's that real kind of courage calls to courage. There's a sense that that when you do that, it connects. I always knew when I was writing my column that there was some that really came from the heart, where I really meant it, and they never failed to connect with other people, because I think that there's a power in the truth. There really is. And when people can sense that when it really comes from a kind of very pure place.
Somebody said, I remember talking to somebody just before the book came out who had done a similar thing, and I said, I'm really scared, and I'm really, if it wasn't too late to stop doing this, I would stop it right now. And they said, look, don't worry. They said, when you make yourself vulnerable, people are really kind. And that actually turned out to be true. I mean, there were a few trolls on the Mail Online. So
yes.
I remember somebody saying, if I was married to her, I'd be drinking a bottle of wine a day, which I thought was a bit rude, actually.
Very rude.
But on the whole, people were incredibly kind. And and it's interesting. Brené Brown talks about the power of vulnerability, doesn't she?
Yeah, I love that. I love that TED talk. I recommend it to all of everyone. Brené Brown on the power of vulnerability. Definitely essential viewing.
It's brilliant. And what I discovered is that actually, when you tell the truth about your own life, people have nothing left to beat you around the head with, if you see what I mean. Because people couldn't really turn around to me and say, no, you're a terrible lush, or you're a really bad mother, or you're a terrible example, because I'd already said all those things about myself. So there was nothing that they had left to say to me that I hadn't already confessed to. And I think that and that made me suddenly feel really brave, because I thought, actually, I now feel pretty invulnerable because I've said it all myself. What is there left to say?
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I think the other thing that happens when you're very vulnerable and real about something that's happened to you is, I remember I wrote a piece for the Telegraph, and I wrote on Noon when we first launched, about how I felt when I left the Sunday Times and I'd been kind of kicked out after so many years being there. And I originally wrote it as the kind of founding story of Noon. And Tiffany Dark, who is a really old friend of mine, a great journalist, editor of the section for years, she said to me, I was writing it, she said, Elsie, if you're going to do this, you've really got to go there. You've spent the last 25 years getting everybody else to spill their guts for you as an editor. You've got, you can't pull your punches. And so she really kind of, and well, it was really horrible. I felt very, very exposed and very naked. And I rang my friend, Decca Aitkenhead, who wrote an incredible memoir about the death of her husband. Her husband drowned on a beach in Jamaica. She wrote this incredible memoir called All at Sea. And I rang her up going, incredible book. She's my very, very best friend. So I rang Decca and I was like, oh my God, I've written this piece. What, I feel really weird about it. What am I going to do? And she was just like, she said, don't worry. When you do this, it's like taking all your clothes off in public. This is why I wanted to tell the story, because it's just like your dream. It's like running down the street naked. But as soon as you get out there and you start running down the street, you'll find that everybody else is running with you and they've taken their clothes off. And I thought that was such a brilliant analogy, because it actually allows other people to share their own kind of vulnerabilities and their own really kind of deep truths. And you just suddenly find yourself in a whole new space. And that was very much the kind of spirit with which Noon was founded.
Exactly. And it's funny. I mean, I think the worst thing about finding myself in the hole I did 7 years ago was that I felt really alone. I felt like I was the only person who, was experiencing these problems in the way that I was. And I felt really, really lonely. And as I started writing the blog, what was extraordinary is I'd confess these really small details about my life, about weird things that I was doing. And I get people all over the world saying, God, I do that too. So to give you an example, I remember confessing that I had this paranoia about cashiers and supermarkets, because I used to worry that they were watching how much wine I was buying and were judging me. And I used to rotate the places I went to buy wine, because then I wouldn't sort of bump into the same cashier too frequently, which was a really ridiculous thing to go through. And I confessed this on my blog, and I had people all over the world saying, I have this paranoia about cashiers too. I do exactly the same thing. And then this one woman replied, and she said, I am a cashier and I judge you.
Brilliant.
But you do find, as you say, that when you do make yourself vulnerable and when you do confess the sort of truth about your life, it's amazing how many other people have found the same things. And and doing so, really, it doesn't just help you, it really helps other people too. There's a real power in making other people feel less alone.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think that also in really kind of sharing the things that you actually feel quite a lot of kind of shame around, there's a kind of great lowering of the kind of general kind of shame threshold, and everybody is also able to be kind of more themselves. I think it kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, we'll come on to this, but there's so much in your book which I think is really interesting around the kinds of worlds we live in and the kind of facades that people keep up, and how kind of people's whole lives can become involved in kind of keeping up a facade which they don't even really believe in, which isn't really them. And I think one of the really kind of interesting things about midlife is the shedding of those layers. I saw a very good friend at the weekend, and she was just saying, I just can't be dealing with hanging out with people where I can't be my true self. That increasingly that if you've got to do something which means that you've got to kind of trim or kind of fit yourself into what somebody else wants you to be, then I think by the time we all hit 50, it's just like, what is the point? And I think that's one of the great freeing things.
Well, I look at my teenagers, and they live their lives sort of online, assuming that everybody's lives are exactly like they look on Instagram and TikTok, and that everybody has to be perfect. And it's nonsense. Nobody's life is perfect. Everybody is hiding stuff. Everybody curates their social media and uses filters and what have you. And as you say, I think the great thing about being post 50 is thinking, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
Bollocks to that.
We can, actually, I tell you, the great thing about Noon is that there are no rules. We can do whatever we like, and often, and I think that's also part of it. After years and years and years of working for a kind of huge kind of media organisation, I have to say I absolutely love the freedom which comes from really being able to use your voice to support the things that you really believe in. I don't think I can go back to not doing that anymore.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think by the time you get to our age, we've all been through bad stuff, and it does make you realize, I think in a way it gives you a lot of courage, because, and I had breast cancer 7 years ago as well. Shortly after I quit drinking, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And coming out of the end of the breast cancer treatment, it just made me think, what's the worst that can happen? What's the worst thing that can happen if I give this a go, or if I show people what I'm really like, or if I don't play the game, or if I go out without makeup on, all those sort of, and the truth is nothing really bad is going to happen. Nothing like getting cancer, or one of your relatives dying, or and we've all been through much worse stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really true. In fact, we actually found that we did a big piece of research for Noon called it's about the secrets of midlife women. It's called The Rise of the Queen Ager, and that is all. Which is because I hate women. So I'm going to have to have mine around here. But I absolutely hate the way that our generation is being kind of branded as these kind of menopausal. I actually refused to appear on a panel at Adweek, which was called Brands Are Waking Up to the Power of Menopausal Women. I said I'd only do it if it was called Queen Agers, not Walking Hot Flushes.
That's such a good expression.
So yeah, so good. So Noon is the home of the Queen Ager, but I think that there's such a kind of, you know, a strong kind of feeling that we're just not prepared to kind of trim and do that kind of thing, you know, anymore. And what comes out of the Noon research is this concept that we talk about as forged in fire. So we did a piece of research with 2,000 women and a whole load of focus groups, and what we find is that the women who've been through the most, the kind of real fortune fire, are actually the ones who are now happiest, because they're the ones who have gone, you know, what is the worst that can happen? I'm not going to live by other people's rules anymore. That sense that time might be a little bit finite, I think, is a great kind of wake up call to live the life that you want and that you believe in, because there's absolutely no point in doing anything else.
There's a great metaphor, actually, which I reference in the book about, the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is a form of pottery. And what the Japanese do is, if a beautiful piece of ceramic is broken, they put it back together again with liquid gold, and it creates a piece of art which is sort of more beautiful and original and unique and valuable than the original unbroken piece was. And I think that for me is a great metaphor about growing older. You know, we are all pieced back together, but we're pieced back together with gold, and we are more beautiful and original and stronger and more valuable as a result. I certainly think so.
Yeah, here. That could be that's a great kind of quote for the Noon website. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Copyright.
No, I think that's totally true, because I also think that there's a confidence. What we talk about is that there's a kind of confidence that comes with that hard-earned wisdom, that you're nobody's fool. You've been around the block and you know what you want and you know what you think, and that is one of the great kind of sweetnesses, I think, of this time. And I think that you get that kind of that sense very much in your book. I'm trying to move my way slightly out of the sunshine. I think you really get that kind of great sense of that kind of in your book, that these people are moving from lives which have actually become kind of quite unhappy or constricted by the kind of lies that they're telling about themselves, and are then kind of freed up by this exercise of actually being able to kind of be real. I don't know if some of you have probably got teenage children who are on this new website called Be Real, but it's like the opposite of social media, because it gives you a notification. You have to immediately take a picture, whatever you're doing. So most of the ones of me, I'm just like sitting in front of my laptop with my glasses on. But even my daughters, you get a much more kind of real kind of sense of where they are. So I think that this sense of kind of be real, and the power of that is really interesting. So I mean, let's talk a bit about your influencer, kind of Alice, because in a way she's the greatest. There's the kind of greatest dichotomy between how she's presenting kind of perfect clothes, perfect baby, perfect life, and the reality, which is she's got terrible postnatal depression and she kind of hates her life.
Yeah, I mean, Alice's experience is really based on my experience of being a young first-time mum. And, I remember, I had my first baby when I was 34, and I'd been a career woman up until that point. And I felt like I was, I was competent and successful and outgoing and all those things. And then I had this baby and I was completely inept. I really didn't know what I was doing. And that was a bit of a shock. And I'm not sure that I had postnatal depression, but I certainly found it really hard. I found it very isolating. I found it physically exhausting. I found it mentally tough. I felt very lonely, and I struggled with breastfeeding, I mean, all the things that Alice is going through. So I sort of revisited that time through Alice. But Alice, unlike, I remember feeling like I couldn't, there were very few people I confessed to in terms of how hard I was finding it. You feel this need to sort of, portray the sort of perfect mum thing, which, I felt to a certain extent, but I took that to extremes with Alice because she's an Instagrammer. And up until this point, she's been portraying her life online as this perfect life, which it was in many ways, and she's completely unable to cope with the fact that her life suddenly isn't perfect anymore, and she still feels a need to sort of post these beautiful pictures of this beautiful life, which just isn't true. So, and I think the more her online life and her real life diverge, the harder she finds it. So, so when she confesses all in the Authenticity Project, she, in a way, I think it's a real release for her. It's the first time she's able to say, I can't do this anymore. This is not, this is not I'm not showing my life. This is not me.
So what is it that do you think that traps people in that kind of need to go on pretending that it's perfect when they know kind of very well that it isn't? I mean, I'm interested in ideas about where we get our ideas about what makes for a kind of successful life, or a kind of enviable life. I mean, you were in advertising before, busy kind of punting out to us the kind of idealized view of what we were supposed to be like.
Yeah, I mean, when I had my first baby, it was the blogging had just started, and there was this new thing of the yummy mummy, and the sort of the perfect mother who sort of baked brilliant cupcakes and home, did all this sort of, arts and crafts, and it was all sort of posted in, on the internet, and there was sort of, and that's even more the case now. There are so many sort of, so many women out there sort of showing these perfect lives, and I think it's just very easy to feel like you're the only person that isn't coping, and I think that's why we find it difficult to confess, because it feels like a failure. It feels like everyone else is managing and we're not. And actually, I'm sure the truth is very different. I'm sure that the people who are doing brilliantly are the exception and not the rule.
Yeah, but I think it can make everybody else feel so bad. There's a good comment on the chat. It says, my epitaph will read, "She said she was fine, pretending I'm doing great every step of the way." Exactly. I think that would resonate with a lot of us.
Maybe it's, some of it is the British stiff upper lip as well. It's that sort of, how are you? I'm fine. I mean, we're all sort of, we're all, I guess, taught not to grumble and to get on with it, and all that sort of thing. And yeah, it's hard to say I'm not coping. It's a very difficult thing to do. So
yeah, I agree. I think it's always hard to kind of to ask for help. But I actually find that if you do ask for help, particularly if you've been somebody who's always seemed to be being quite kind of on top of things, I mean, the majority of people are absolutely delighted to kind of offer it. And I think you usually find the kind of the true kind of kindness in people when you actually kind of call on them to help you. And I don't think that's Pollyannish. I think there's something about lowering your own kind of guard and admitting that your life is not perfect, that then also kind of enables other people to kind of help you. I mean, you said the opposite of addiction is connection. I think that's totally right. And actually reaching out and being able to say to somebody, I feel really vulnerable about this, or this is really not working out, or I'm really unhappy, kind of, can you help me, is such an important thing for all of us to be able to do if we're actually going to have any connection which is based on any kind of reality.
And I think one of the things that I explore really in the book is how the world has changed since Julian, who starts the Authenticity Project, he's 79, and he's lived in the same house since the 1960s, and the world around him has changed, but he's remained just the same. And he talks about how when he first moved into that house, where everybody knew their neighbors and everybody helped each other out, and if somebody was in trouble, people would rally. And the problem is now we're more connected than we've ever been via the internet and via social media and so on and so forth. But often we're not at all connected in our local communities, particularly in places like London. I think things are a little bit different in the north, but in the south of England, certainly it's we are often very isolated, despite superficially being very connected.
Yeah, no, I think that that's very true, and I'm very interested in the role that community kind of plays in your book. I mean, I would just butt in as a born and bred Londoner, just to say, actually, I think that there is kind of real community in London. I've lived in the same place for 25 years. I know all my neighbours. My neighbourhood in London is like a village. I cannot walk down to the shops without kind of bumping into people I know. I know
Oh,
the
well, that's
kids. I know
fabulous.
the. So I think it's not. There are ways of becoming very much part of a fabric of a community, but I also agree that London can be kind of super anonymous, and if you're just kind of in there and you're working and you don't know your neighbours. So tell us a bit about the kind of vision of the cafe, which is at the heart of this book. And I'm also interested in how she shifts, doesn't she, from, she's a solicitor, she's something kind of quite high powered, into being into running this cafe. And I'm also interested in those transitions very much, and that kind of shift from one kind of a life to another, and what that entails.
Yeah, I mean, Monica, who first finds the Authenticity Project, she was a city solicitor, and she there's a actually this comes from a story that I read in the newspaper many years ago, and I remember reading about a woman who was a city solicitor, and she spent all her life working, as many people in that sort of job do, and to the extent that everybody she knew was based around work. She didn't really have a social life or that many friends outside work anymore, because she spent so much time working. And apparently her boss turned around to her and said, look, you have to stop coming in at weekends, because it's not good for you. I don't want to see you here this weekend. And apparently she realized at that point that she had no life apart from work. And she ended up committing suicide, which was just the most terrible story to read. And that story sort of inspired Monica's backstory, really, because Monica in the book reads that story in the newspaper, and she realizes that if she carries on the way she is, that that's the way her life is going, that she has nothing, sort of, her work is taking up too much space. And so she quits her job, and she buys a cafe on the Fulham Road, and she turns it into her ideal cafe, which is a combination of books and coffee. So she has a book sort of book area in the corner where people can exchange books. You can leave a book of yours and take another one away for free. And this becomes her sort of, her ideal place. But she still struggles, because she struggles in the same way I think that many women in their 30s do, and I certainly did, between being a feminist on one hand and believing that women don't need a man, and we don't need to, we can manage by ourselves, and we can be financially independent, and all of those things. And at the same time, she does really sort of want the husband and kids and the Volvo and the Labrador, but she finds it very difficult to reconcile those things. And that's the truth that she tells in the book, is about how, despite not wanting to listen to her biological clock, it's keeping her awake at night.
Yeah, no, I think that that's very true, and it's not something that's really kind of explored that much. But I'm kind of also interested in how we switch our kind of sense of what success looks like. So for her, she's been told, if you get a good job and you become a lawyer, and you kind of, you get the flat and you get the salary, then you've ticked the boxes. And I think that as we all get older, we realize that those kind of externally given kind of boxes to tick are not actually what's going to make you happy.
No, exactly. And that's what she realizes when she reads that newspaper article, the same article that I read years ago, is that, that superficially successful life with the sort of great flat and the great car and the, all the designer clothes is not what makes you happy. What makes you happy is far more fundamental than that. It's friends and family, and and health, and it's all and the things that you feel passionate about.
Yeah, I think totally, and I think that there is a good sense in the book about how isolated people can get, and the really sad, I don't want to give away the kind of twist on Julian, but that sense of him kind of on his own with his wife having gone, and kind of him kind of mouldering, kind of mouldering away and not speaking to anybody. And it is interesting how people go down those kind of cul-de-sacs in their lives, don't they? And but also I like the kind of power of redemption, that he could be kind of pulled back out again.
Yeah, and it's what I think is interesting. There's a quote right at the beginning of the book. It's a Leonard Cohen lyric, and it goes, "Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." And I think what I wanted the characters in the book to discover, and what I wanted people reading it to discover, is that when all those flaws that those people think they have, the things that they think are wrong with them are actually the things that make them unique and strong and interesting and beautiful. And I think all of them, by the end, in some way, shape, or form, come to realize that that the things that they thought were real problems are actually sort of part of a fundamental part of what makes them who they are.
Do you think that's also about kind of learning to kind of come to terms with who we really are, rather than, who we might be pretending to the world that we are?
Yes, absolutely. It's about it's funny because when I write characters, I start from the perspective of their flaws and not their strengths, because I think our flaws are the most sort of interesting thing about us, and the way we deal with our flaws is the most interesting thing about us. So, I look at my great friends, and they all have something about them that is not perfect, and I love those things about them. That's what makes them them. And I think if we realize that actually, if we learn to embrace our flaws rather than cover them up, I think we'd be a lot happier.
Yeah, I mean, how do we kind of pass that on to our children? I mean, particularly when they're in moments of stress. I know that you've got 18-year-old doing A levels at the moment, and so is Jen, who's busy manning the womaning the new logo above. And I think that during those times of when they're really kind of under pressure, it's so hard to kind of get across to them that there are different ways of kind of valuing themselves.
Yeah, and I think what I try and do with mine is to constantly remind them that what they see on social media and what they see on, people's outsides are not the same as their insides. And it's very easy for them to judge themselves on somebody's, against somebody's perfect front, when we know that's not the reality. So, I try and constantly remind them that nobody's life is perfect. Nobody is always happy. Everybody is struggling with something. And, and that is perfectly normal. So don't believe don't believe the sham, because that's all it is. And if other people were to look at their lives, they probably think that their lives were, perfect as well, which, we know they're not. So yes, that's what I try and do. But it takes a long time to learn that lesson, I think.
Do you think that people have always had trouble kind of being authentic, or is it a particular kind of syndrome of the modern era?
Oh, interesting question. I mean, I think we've always, I think we've always been encouraged to put our best face forward. So, if you look back at our parents' generation, they always used to, I know with my mother and father's families, they always used to sort of sweep anything under the carpet that sort of both literally and figuratively that they could, so it was always about sort of Sunday best and, sort of keeping the sort of family dirty linen sort of, out of sight. But I think social media has made that 100 times more oppressive, because we see so much more of each other's lives now than we used to, and so much, but those lives are all curated.
Yeah, I think that's right, that there's both a kind of more of a transparency about kind of other people's lives, but also a very kind of distorting lens, that it's really not,
Yeah.
it's that kind of semblance, that pretense of a kind of, you're seeing me as I am, all those kind of behind the scenes kind of Instagrammers. And then the reality, of course, is not like that at all. I mean, I remember going to
it's a humble brag, isn't it? There's sort of,
yeah, but
how chaotic my life is. I haven't put this sort of, one piece of orange peel in the bin yet, so.
Yeah, but it's always so calculated. And whenever you're actually kind of, I was at a I will be careful about not mentioning names, but I was at a very, very big influencers kind of part, because it was all kind of being post-regimented world, where everyone had to wear a particular colour for, a certain kind of picture or certain kind of theme, so that it would, and you felt like you were just being manipulated like a kind of extra.
God, how extraordinary.
You want me to be there for, for me, your friend, or do you want me to be there as a kind of curated extra, which is going to kind of fit your choreography of the day? I must say I hated it.
No, I can imagine. God, how extraordinary.
I wouldn't recommend it. So I've asked on the chat, what do people think? Are we more authentic or less authentic than people used to be? Less authentic now, in part because of the pressures of social media and associated expectations. I think that's probably right. Nicola. But I think you're right that there were different kinds of pressures. The kind of keeping up with the Joneses, the kind of lace curtain kind of twitching, the kind of that kind of real sense of kind of wanting kind of respectability, and what would it be like if you kind of you let the side down. And I think there have always been social kind of norms which kept people very much kind of in their lane, as it were.
Yes, and I think in many ways things have got a lot better. I mean, it's much more. It's much easier to be. It's much easier to be gay. It's much easier to be different. It's much easier to be, eccentric. All of it's. I don't think there's the same pressure now in anything like the same sort of pressure to conform, but there is much more pressure to be perfect. I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting one here from Gillian. She says, as I get older, I find I have to be less authentic. Because I'm older, younger people look to me for answers and advice, and I just feel a fraud. I cannot describe the real me as I could when younger. She thinks Gillian does have a point. Yeah, but see, you don't want to kind of let onto them quite how grim things can be. I have to say, I know what you mean a bit. I've got two kids, and whenever I see somebody who's pregnant with their second baby, or when they're just about to kind of go over the kind of precipice into becoming a parent for the first time, and they kind of ask you what it's going to be like, all shiny-eyed, and I have to say I don't tell them, particularly on the second baby. I mean, I had two within 2 years, and it was absolutely hideous. If I see a mum looking absolutely exhausted and frazzled with 2 small children, I go, yeah, it was like the hardest time of my life. My friends had never seen me look so broken. But but you can't really. There are things that you can't say to people as they kind of go into it, because you just sound like such a kind of bitter old kind of Scrooge. You can't go, oh, it's going to be really tough.
I guess there is a difference, isn't there, between telling the truth and telling the whole truth.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bit in the.
I don't know about that, actually, Claire. I don't know about that. I don't know whether that you kind of a bit of the truth is often a bit of a lie, I think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because there's a bit in the book where Baz and Julian, anyone who's read it, I won't say too much about the situation in case for the spoilers, but Baz and Julian have an argument because Julian accidentally lets the
cat out of the bag,
to Baz's granny, and Baz says, sometimes we keep secrets to protect people, and that's sort of, and exactly as you say, sometimes it's not nice to tell somebody about to have a baby that they're about to, they're about to enter probably the hardest time of their lives. So sometimes it is a kindness to keep things slightly secret.
Yeah, no, I think definitely, but I know I think there's a challenge, isn't there, between not kind of make it out it's all going to be great, so that when they kind of go over the cliff and they realize it's really awful, that they feel really bad, but at the same time not wanting them to kind of go into it feeling kind of really terrified.
Yes.
I feel I don't know what other people feel. I feel like that a bit about the kind of menopause chat at the moment. I mean, I feel we put some stuff out on Noon this morning because I was reading the Kirsty Young stuff at the weekend about her fibromyalgia and how hard it was to get diagnosed with that. And I think that there's such a huge kind of inequality when it comes to a kind of health inequality about kind of older women and their treatments. And I think that she kind of highlighted something really interesting. I think the same on menopause, that there's a huge, given that it happens to half the population, GPs should be trained in it at medical school, most of them aren't, and they should be able to kind of give us things which actually might make it better, like bioidentical HRT, which you can't get in lots of bits of the country, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I think it's very important that we talk about those things, but I'm worried about the kind of branding and some of the kind of scare stuff around menopause, because I think that there's also quite a lot of women coming up behind us who are absolutely terrified now of kind of being menopausal, and a sense of kind of women being branded as kind of hysterical, or kind of in hock to their wombs, kind of again just at the point where they begin to actually escape quite a lot of that biology. So I'm kind of I have kind of mixed feelings about it. I think we want the right treatment and the right information, but we also don't want to be branded by our hormones. I mean, for me, that's a real like kind of feminist thing, that I don't want to be seen as kind of hysterical in a walking womb. I want the information and the treatment that I'm entitled to, and I want to be seen as being a kind of a person who's capable of amazing things. I see this as kind of coming into my prime. I don't want to be kind of written off as somebody who's kind of a walking hot flush. So I think that there's some interesting things, aren't there, about how things are framed when actually a discussion is quite important.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I mean, I am very, very lucky in that I haven't had a difficult menopause, and I mean, I've had hot flushes and sort of but it hasn't actually really derailed my life in any way, shape or form. And in many ways, it's given me a whole new lease of life, because, I think when you're not enslaved to your hormones and you're not sort of no longer feeling this sort of, primeval urge to mollycoddle everybody, it allows you to be a little bit more selfish and a little bit more sort of think about yourself for once and what you need. And, I agree that I don't want people to feel that it's awful for everybody. It is very hard for some people, and it is absolutely necessary, as you say, that the help is available. But again, we don't want to create a new stereotype, and we don't want to terrify people, and we don't want to make any sort of potential employer think that we're unemployable because of our hormones. So yes, I think there are definitely sort of two sides to that debate.
No, I think so, and I think we've only really seen kind of one side of it. So I think that there's somebody says, I think on the authenticity path we might be finding a bit more of an equilibrium. We've seen too much fakery with the explosion of social media, and kind of people reacting against that a bit and wanting to be a bit more real.
Yes, I very much hope so. And I think there certainly seems to be more understanding of sort of fake news and the lengths that people go to make their lives look perfect. So yes, hopefully we are coming out the other side of that.
Yeah, I think so. And also I think people realizing how difficult that actually, or the kind of really bad effect that can have, and that they might be hiding behind it, but actually it has a kind of really negative effect kind of down the line. I think that's someone's saying there's an amazing play called Midlife, which is brilliant on some of this, and was pre-pandemic, and talks about what about if the world just stopped, which it really did. But that looks great, Helen. Thanks. We'll check that out. I think I think that this is an age where all sorts of interesting kind of shifts are allowed to happen. I really like what you said about us becoming kind of a bit more selfish. I don't know if I would even categorize it as selfish. I coach quite a few women, and I'm and I have a lot of conversations with them. And what I'm often really struck by is just how many women by this point seem to be slightly sleepwalking kind of through their own lives. I come across quite a lot who seem to have kind of forgotten what it is they liked or what they wanted, that they've been kind of looking after everybody else and putting everybody's needs ahead of their own for so long that they kind of have almost forgotten what their own needs were or what they liked. I did a session with a woman last week, and I was talking to her about that we would like trying to kind of tune back in her kind of compass point for where her due north was. We were talking about how she might do that, and I was going, well, just every day, you know, try and make a few decisions which are things that you really want to do. And she was having real kind of real trouble with that. She was like, well, what kind of things? So I said, well, you know, we'll watch something on the telly that you really want to watch, not that you think everybody else around you, or, you know, do a couple of three things a day which are just actually for you, and begin to, it's like a kind of muscle almost that needs retraining. It sounds like such a kind of crazy thing to say, but I really see it a lot, that so many women start off with kind of dreams and kind of exciting things that they want to kind of have happen in their lives, and then they somehow lose sight of those in looking after everyone else and all the life happening. And I really see this point as becoming a queenager as an opportunity to actually really kind of delve back into what makes your life here at this time worthwhile and meaningful. I mean, I'm a great admirer of what you've done with your blog, and, you know, now writing a book. But I think that there is that kind of explosion of energy in lots of women at this point, where they need to kind of retune in with themselves and find out what their kind of purpose is. What are the next kind of 20, 30 years going to be for? Oh, I love that.
Enough, that's the whole theme of my that's the whole theme of my new book, The People on Platform 5, where the heroine is 57 and she's about to be made redundant, and she feels like, you know, just at the point where she's got all this to offer, and she's got so much sort of wisdom and energy, and she's got so much life left, and yet she's been, you know, she feels invisible and she's being written off. And she's called Iona, and she's spectacular, and she goes on to have a triumphant second act, and she encourages sort of, you know, other women to do the same thing. And I think personally that, you know, we have now that our life expectancy is so, you know, so much, you know, so much greater. You know, we really can have a complete second act after the age of 50, and I think we all deserve that. We really do. You know, we've given so much of ourselves for so long.
No, I think that's really true, and I think it's right that we need to kind of re-characterize that, not as selfishness, but just as kind of actually what we're owed, what we're due. I love Helen on the chats, but Susan Hyatt talks about vitamin P for pleasure and putting joy back in. I love that. Everything we try and do at noon is about saying older women deserve joy, fun, you know, purpose, kind of happiness, all the good stuff, and I don't think we get enough of that. You know, I don't think that message is out there in society enough. So well done you for writing a book about it.
And I think it's also really important for our teenagers and, you know, our young adults, because, you know, they need to see that, you know, you can carry on having a full and productive and creative life, you know, well into your 50s, 60s and beyond. I think that's a really important message for them.
I do. I mean, we talk at noon a lot about I want my daughters to look forward to being 50 as when they come into their prime, when they become a queenager, where someone described it brilliantly in our research. She said, I love being a queen. She said, I love being a queenager. It's like being a teenager, but I'm in my own house with nice sheets and posh tea.
Yes, exactly. I love that.
And I thought that was
brilliant.
That sense of a transition and the excitement of a new phase, but also having, you know, some kind of creature comforts and knowing a bit about life that you didn't when you were younger. On that note, actually, I want to tell you all about something that came out of a Noon book club a few weeks ago. Some of you, or a few months ago, you'll remember we did a Noon book club with the lovely Erica Waller, who talked about her book Dog Days. And while we were on it, we were all talking about putting together a walk near where Erica lives down in Rottingdean, Brighton. So we've actually done this, and it's going to happen on the 26th of June. Sorry, the sunshine's gone crazy now. It's going to happen on the 26th of June. So if you fancy joining us, it's free. Just come along. There will be cake. You can bring a dog if it's pretty well behaved, and it'll go on a lead some of the time. And we also might try and swim in the sea at Brighton if the weather's not too inclement. Or some of us, well, I'm a bit crazy on the sea swimming, so I'll probably go in. But if you'd like to join us, since it came out of the book club, it would be fantastic to see lots of you there. So 26th of June, which is a Sunday, and Jen has just put the Eventbrite link kind of in the chat, or if you can't note that down, if you just go to Eventbrite and put in the noon walk, it will come up. So sorry Claire to interrupt you, but we it came out of a chat that we were having on one of these things, so it seemed important to mention it so people know it's going on. Is there so Claire, what's been for you the most rewarding aspect of getting kind of published as an author, getting your first novel out there, kind of speaking your, being able to kind of speak your truth and having made a bit of an impact?
You know what, I think every time I get a message from someone, which I do every day, saying that something I've written has in some way impacted their lives, it's just such an honor. It's such a wonderful thing to be able to do. And I think you can do that through non-fiction and through fiction, either way. I mean, I think that for me is the best thing, is feeling that something I've said has made a difference. I mean, so for instance, Monica in the Authenticity Project, as I mentioned that she struggles with this thing about sort of not being a mother, and at one point Alice, the Instagrammer, says to her, Monica, mother is a verb and not a noun. And what she means is that, you can mother in many different ways. Rather, you don't have to be a mother to be able to mother people. And Monica is a very motherly person, even though she doesn't have children. And, I've had so many messages from women saying, how just that paragraph, for instance, has really changed the way they've looked at life. And so, that's just a small example, but when I get messages like that, it really, it's really touching. It just, it's great. It makes everything worthwhile. All those 5 a.m. starts writing in my kitchen by myself,
No, I think that that's very true. And I also think that that's something which would really resonate with the Noon community, because we know that around 25%, between 25 and 30% of women aged 45 to 60 now don't have kids. The university educated ones, and but yet we never see them represented kind of more broadly in the media. And I think that one of the really kind of coming debates, and something we talk about a lot about here, is that sense of how that later bit of life is going to be different, and what kind of purpose or your kind of legacy, or what you leave behind is like, and your kind of motivations around that. If you haven't done the thing which society says women are supposed to do, and now that there are so many of us, who haven't. I mean, so many of my girlfriends are, are not mothers, and many of them aren't with a partner either, but they have amazingly interesting, rich, fulfilling lives. So, and I think that it's really up to kind of all of us to reflect, quite a lot of that too, because I think that the voices of older women, in all societies tend to get marginalized, but those women are really not seen at all. And that's something that I think is really important to change and to talk about.
Yeah. Yes, and Iona in the new novel doesn't have children and has never wanted to have children, and that sort of, and she has never questioned that decision, and I think it's important that we have more characters in fiction, as well as sort of as well as people talking about real lives where women make those sorts of choices and they make them happily.
Yeah, no, we see that. So in our research, nearly just under half of the women who haven't had kids have chosen, actively chosen not to have kids. They didn't want them. But again, it's not something that's kind of, talked about enough. So I think there are so many things around kind of older women. I mean, the menopause is like the kind of the tip of the iceberg. And I hope that we're going to open up a much bigger and broader conversation about all the things of which kind of women from midlife onwards are capable of. That's definitely my mission.
Yes, well, I think we're the first generation to have got to this age who are used to having these sorts of conversations. You know, when our mothers got to this age, they didn't talk about the change or, you know, any of those sorts of things. They didn't talk about what they, you know, what they needed to feel fulfilled or any of these sorts of discussions. And I think we are the first generation to have got to this point who are used to doing that and who will do that. So
yeah, and it's
really interesting to see what.
And it's not, you know, it's not just a hunch that we're the first generation. We are. You can see it in the statistics. So I love this. The 2019 census shows that women over 40 for the first time are out earning women under 40. So in our generation, so that's changed in 2019. So there's a flip over, which shows that so many more women have stayed in the labour market kind of beyond their child rearing years. And actually, it always used to be the case that women in their 20s kind of kept pace with men in terms of their salaries, and then as soon as they kind of hit 30, forget it, and they never recovered. And that is different, and that shows that we really are a new pioneering cohort of women of which there haven't been a like before, and therefore the way that society views us needs to change. And so I think that, you know, books like yours and hopefully things like Noon can really try and shift that conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the plan anyway. So everybody, we've hit 8 o'clock and I've got a hard stop because I've got to be somewhere, so I'm going to have to go. Sorry, I'm right in the sun again. And but I just want to say thank you so much to Clare for joining us. Thank you to all of you for listening and for being here and for contributing so wonderfully. And always thanks to Jen, who runs with us so brilliantly and jumps into the conversation. And if you'd like to join us for the Noon Walk, do check it out either on the Eventbrite or on our social medias, etc., etc. And we've slightly changed the way that this Noon Book Club works, because you may have noticed, somebody, that I now do my weekly newsletter, which is on Substack. It's called the Queen Ager. So if you become a paid member of the Substack, then you get a free book for the book club. People can join, but you get a free book if you become a paid subscriber, which is also a way of supporting Noon. We haven't really explained that very well, but that's what's going on. I'll send out a post which explains a bit better. But thank you so much to Clare for coming, and to Becky and to Transworld always for helping us do this. And good luck, Clare. I can't wait to read your next book, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on and having such a fabulous discussion. I've really enjoyed it, and I just love the word Queen Ager, and I'm going to use it all over the place. I hope you don't mind.
No, absolutely do. I mean, if you could tell people about the Queen Ager newsletter as well, we'd be delighted. And we're just putting together some Queen Ager t-shirts, so we'll make sure we send you one.
Oh, that would be wonderful, and I will post it on social media.
Brilliant. Oh yeah, there's lots of fun things on the chat. Everyone's really liked it. So thank you so much for joining us, and see you all soon. We'll put out the details of the next Noon Book Club in the next week or so. Until then, have a fantastic Jubilee, however you choose to celebrate it. Bye bye. Thank you, everyone.